The word import seems to be the star of this offseason, with Benjamaster crossing the Atlantic to join SSG, Virtue staying in Europe instead of returning to Aussieland, and Titan going in his place. There's a lot going on with imports, and this is ignoring the flood of international interest going towards South Korea and the rest of APAC at large. Siege is truly becoming a worldwide esport in every sense of the word, and this is all ignoring teams like G2, M80, Geek, Secret, or Revan, who are ahead of the curve. Imports are a bit of an odd subject in esports. Bringing over a superstar player makes sense, but it's a risky gambit in more ways than one. Integrating a player, or even just a coach or support staff from a different country can have any number of struggles, from culture clashes to language barriers, or even just stylistic differences in how the game is played and thought of. It can also lead to the original region turning into a non-competitive money sink that's a joke to everyone while they keep burning money and they ignore developing their own talent because that's hard work. Anyways, let's throw some more dollars. By the way, now we have to fucking sell out to the devil. Oh, whoops, sorry, didn't mean to get distracted. Right, imports. As much as there are huge risks and potential negatives to picking up an imported player or coach or support staff, smart imports can genuinely make world beater teams. Simple to Team Liquid back in 2014-2015 of Counter-Strike Global Offensive put North America on the map for that iteration of the game. Alamau to G2 won the organization a third hammer, and if you look at League of Legends, Scout and Viper winning worlds with EDG, clearly there is merit to looking outside your regional borders to give you that extra 5, 10, 15, 20%. Unfortunately for Siege, the rate of success on these imports tends to be low. Given how prevalent imports have been this season, I wanted to talk about the history of imports in Siege and see just how well they played out for everyone involved. This is by no means a comprehensive list, but it should fill out at least the notable imports and maybe some quirky little surprises to give you a better idea of how imported players in Rainbow Six have progressed throughout time. While it may sound odd, North America has actually exported quite a few players, and possibly was the progenitor of imports in the scene entirely, though they never found big name success and never moved to a big name organization. One of the first imported players in all of Rainbow Six was Moss, having joined Gosu alongside fellow American Fighter for the 2019 Southeast Asia Invitational Qualifiers. Moss first broke out into the scene with Most Wanted in Year 2 Season 1, and then put on some notable performances individually. Fighter was the classic console player from teams like Elevate, Most Wanted back then, I think Excellence as well. These two players were invited to play for Gosu for the Invitational Qualifiers, but also in theory the Pro League season at large. Unfortunately, Moss and Fighter joining up with players like Ysera and Shinbagel did not pay off, and Gosu didn't make it out of qualifiers, and due to friction between Shin and the Americans, Gosu didn't even make it to the first Pro League match. Of course, these aren't the only NA exports. Before Revan got hooked on importing European talent, they actually got their first taste of imports by bringing Dot Dash and Raph in from America to compete in Mexican Pro League. Lethal Gamage in Canadian. Lethal Gamage? Is that what it is? Lethal Gamage, yeah, that's his name, and Canadian Default also joined in but didn't have nearly as much tenure. Actually, since we're here, we might as well talk about Revan. Revan is the rebranded version of Met and saw success with their attempts to just make full-on import teams. They literally acted on the joke that everyone makes about how, oh, if you just go to a minor region and you import a full team of like T2 American or European or Brazilian talent, you'll just win the minor region and qualify to the major, bro. And to be fair, it did work. Revan has qualified to a major, but their success is inconsistent and it's a mixed bag of success, which is kind of the way it goes with imports no matter what happens. I want to talk about APAC a little bit more. Obviously, Moss and Fighter got brought into APAC for their stint in Gosu, but by no means are those two the only imports or exports out of this region. Fnatic is the big one, having bet on French support player Alphama after their super team attempt with Mentalist didn't work out. And, if you want to be finicky, you could argue that Mentalist himself is an import because APAC is just so big. Going from SEA to Oceania is a import unto itself. And, mileage may vary, but in theory, that's an import already. And then it's followed up by Alphama being brought on, but he didn't help. There was improvement, to be sure. 8th place to 5th place is improvement, but it's not the supercharge that Fnatic was looking for to bring them back onto that plucky underdog status, or, heaven forbid, actual competitor for a major trophy. And they scrapped the whole Aussie project not long after. They followed this up by going all in on a Japanese team, plus the former captain Magnet and Dizzle from the Australian team. So if you're counting APAC imports, this is another one, because you've got 2 Australians learning Japanese and moving over to Japan to play with with 4 other Japanese players. And if we're mentioning Fnatic, we have to mention how they're now playing in Europe with a European team. Though they did bring Jigsaw along for that transition. And EU is where all of the action is, so let's elaborate on it. Of course, let's not elaborate about how that first stage with Jigsaw went. That was just no bueno. Europe's seen the most imports and exports, particularly thanks to a super team Fnatic and money-laden NA orgs who are too lazy to develop their own talent pipelines when they have all these dollar bills. G2 has done a lot to increase the worldliness of Europe, having brought on Virtue right after he kicked them to the lower bracket of SI20, and then later bringing in Alamau and Ramalho from Brazil. Clearly the Alamau pickup paid off, at least in the short term, because 3 hammers is 3 hammers, but it did not have the staying power that the organization would have hoped for. G2's most recent roster changes continue this trend of both going for the super team and looking internationally to find that superstar, as Loira is getting picked up from Brazil and Blaz is getting returned to Europe after his stint in the MENA League. If we look at other European teams that have gone for imports, you have to look at Team Secret as well. They've flirted with the idea, starting with their coach, Twister! And then following it up with players like Miracle and Falls. Unlike G2, there was no short-term success for Team Secret, as Falls left pretty quickly on, and the results weren't really there, but the team seems to be on the up and up as they placed top 8 in Manchester with Miracle, and they traded one import for another as Virtue left G2 and joined Secret in place of a Brazilian player. So, net 0 on the import count this offseason. But if we're talking about imports, the home of imports is NA. The biggest buyer of European exports has got to be North America, because who else would it be? We're too lazy to make proper teams at the tier 1 level. Why would we develop our own very clearly talented region when we could just spend money to take players from somewhere else? I'm not mad, you are. While Blaz and Spoit might be the first European imports to come to mind, they aren't actually the first European players to grace the Freedom Lands, as Alfama, there he is again, was the first European brought into NA. Before he went to Australia, he was brought onto E-United to join Forest, Grixer, Yeti, and Callout. This team was a mess, and I don't want to talk about them any longer than I have to. They played like it was a TDM meta, but on steroids, right as we were entering the 22nd meta, and they were putting their support player on Ashe. That's it. No more. I'm not talking about them. Instead, I'm going to talk about Tempo Storm, who decided that they were smarter than E-United. This team, composed of Dream, Crazy, Creators, and Mark the Shark, decided to pick up the Italian entry Sloppy, who was touted as this potential, talent. And you know what happened? Halfway through the season, he was already put on hard support, and everyone was acting like that was the plan all along. It messed with his career, as he's never recovered from that first shot on Tempo and his not-so-glorious return to the Italian makers. And Tempo Storm, for their part, never were contenders before, during, or after Sloppy joined. Before we talk about the big import team in North America for the current moment, let's talk about an organization that brought in a classic duo to NA from the European side. Slevin and Gomfy were brought onto the Sonics led by Super, and as with every import, they were supposed to be these cracked out players ready to dominate under the leadership of their new IGL. I mean, let's be real, if you're picking up an import and they aren't cracked out individuals, why? Unfortunately for Super and these two players, things didn't play out this way as the team got relegated within a season. After that, it was lackluster results in T2 and qualifiers right up until the Sonics bought an NAL slot to speed up their glorious return to Tier 1. Oh god, that's not better. Yeah, after 2020, the Sonics let the Europeans return home, and the org opted to speed up their competent team building by just straight up acquiring the promising core of E United and slotting Super in over Alfama. Hey, wait a minute, I've seen this one before. The Sonics are actually one of the most consistent importers of European players, and this is proven because they followed up a top 4 placing at Yangcheping by spending big to bring Citizen across the ocean. The idea was to give the team a boost ahead of SI23, and their efforts were rewarded with a nifty participation trophy as the team looked strong in the group stage and promptly got booted out of the event by Dark Zero and Astralis in playoffs. Seriously, what is that monstrosity? I'm not gonna say the Citizen pickup didn't work out. The team did better than 2022 with the Brit on the team. After all, the Sonics won a stage of the NAL, they attended both majors in 2023, placed top 4 in one of them, and even got a 5th to 6th at SI24. But they weren't consistent with this pickup, and if you look at the Sonics importing strategy, their overall output wasn't consistent either. And to close out here, I figured we'd end on two really obvious import teams that are still in North America to this day. If we're talking about NA and we're talking about imports, Los One and M80 should come to mind instantly if you're keeping track of modern Rainbow Six in the NAL. Los One is the quicker one, so let's get them out of the way. First, it's an all-Brazilian team put into NA because this region's so free, which is precisely why Los One is losing to Space Station Academy. Land of the free, huh? M80 is the very definition of a mixed team, as they don't have a single American player on here if you do the flag check. Spoit was the marquee signing of this organization back in 2023, but that majority NA roster only dominated domestically, and they couldn't do shit on LAN. Spoit was no exception. It's not like he was carrying the team while everyone else was underperforming. That whole team didn't know how to win against anyone other than North Americans. This new team looks to be way more consistent, having done well in NA, as well as actually getting some value out of all that money spent to form this team by winning some international matches, before getting booted off Manchester's main stage by a North American team. So, mileage may vary, but I'd call that a success based off of placing alone. M80 is still a young team, so we'll have to see how they do in the rest of the year, but they're an interesting one. And, of course, before I end this, we gotta talk about South Korea. Let's go, moneymakers! It started with Fabian joining PSG Talon, but it's quickly been followed up as you have coaches like Dark coming in to join Fearex from Brazil. You have coaches like Wafer, who has historically been in North America, now making the jump to Mir with Blur and Sloth joining him as players on the South Korean team. You have Jax joining Fearex. You have Mr. B starting to coach Daystar. APAC is getting a lot of imports all of a sudden, and I forgot to mention this at the start, but Kerpel is a French coach and analyst who was actually helping out Fnatic way back with Alfama and Mentalist and that era of the team. So if you're looking for Coaches going to APAC, we have a long and vaunted history of that. Who are some of your favorite imports? Who do you think is going to make the jump across to a new region next? And how do you think some of these teams are going to do with these gambits of these imports? Let me know down in the comments below.